Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Brown People Problems. Today, we are continuing our little series on financial health, brown folks, and finances, that entire topic that got so much love. And I am so happy to have my good friend here with me for this conversation. So if you're new here, this is a podcast where we literally just chat about brown people problems and what it just looks like to be a brown person from around the world and just navigate everyday life circumstances and life issues. So if this sounds up your alley, stay tuned. And today we're talking about a topic that's really, really close to my heart. And for that, I have my lovely friend, Dimple Dalal. She's joining me. She is an alumni of the Schulich School of Business here in Toronto, Canada. And she has spent the last decade in investment banking, and she's a brown woman. And today we're going to be talking about brown women and financial literacy specifically. So I couldn't think of anyone better. So welcome, Dimple. I'm so happy to have you here today.
I'm so excited to be here, and I'm really looking forward to, giving some good advice to the listeners. The one thing I would like to say, I'm not a financial planner, so if people do want, bespoke financial advice, they should really go to, financial advisors. But anything other than that, happy to chat about.
Yeah, and I appreciate that disclaimer. We usually have a disclaimer at the end as well, folks. This is not therapeutic advice, not financial advice, not medical advice. So please do not take it as such. This is just a conversation. Use your due diligence, use your common sense, use mindfulness as you engage in what you're listening to. But I appreciate that reminder.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, Gosh, we have so much to talk about. My brain is just running with everything that I want to talk to you about. But let's kind of maybe start off with just your decision to go into investment banking. But I don't know if this is so much like you and I have kind of spoken about in our personal lives too, but you are the first brown woman that I have met who is in investment banking. And it's already such a career path, like finance, a career path that's maybe not, was one of the first ones that's offered to brown women and women in general. I think we just automatically gravitate towards, or we're socialized to gravitate towards more like caregiving roles, right? Like nursing, social work, healthcare, like things like that. And so I'm really curious about what the process was like for you to get into finance and in particular investment banking.
Yeah, I think it's a question I, get a lot, and very often. And, I think the one thing that I would really like to mention is that, you just don't wake up one day and decide you want to be an investment banker. There's quite a lot of journey. And I think, for me, it really started from high school. So, like every Brown family, everyone was, in two lanes, either science or engineering, right?
Yeah.
So that was like the first battle to fight, I would say, right? Internally in your household, where, you're telling them that I don't want to do sciences. So that was something I decided in grade 11 that I'm not doing, biology, I'm not doing physics. I want to go and take other courses. I want to learn about other things. And so that was the day where, I really shut the door on science. And I was
Mm.
like, okay, I really need to figure it out now because my dad is a pharmacist. My mom's a chemist. Like,
Oh, wow.
it's a big, it's like a bit of a revolutionary decision at that point because you're also 15 years old.
Yeah.
So I did that. And then, my parents couldn't understand naturally, right? Because for them, it was so logical to become a pharmacist because the rubric is there, the path is laid out,
Mhm.
but it just wasn't for me. So I closed that door. And then in grade 11, again, started thinking about universities. And I was like, okay, business seems like, it just opens everything for you.
Mm.
And even if you don't know what you're doing. So I decided to apply to business school, which again, was the other, well, like if you're intelligent, like should you go to business school, right? Like that's the narrative you hear, but it's completely incorrect, right?
Mhm.
Like you can go there, you can learn, you can figure out other paths and you can meet people, right? The whole benefit of business is to network, meet individuals, and I really didn't like that narrative. So I was like, I'll
Mhm.
go to business school. It doesn't matter. Went to business school again. Never knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
The story is just that I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I used all my internships to just figure out what you're learning in class. Does that match to what the job is?
Mm.
Because there's a huge disconnect I personally found in business school where they will, like, you learn marketing as a course, but marketing in real life is, maybe 5 to 10% of that.
Mm.
Accounting is the same, right? What you learn in school is not actually, like, you'd use what you're learning in class, but there's other things around it. So my goal each summer was like, I don't know what I'm doing. My parents really can't help me because they're from a big science background. And I have no one actually to guide me. So what can I do? I can only try to figure it out myself.
Mm.
So each summer I decided I'm going to pick a vertical in business and then just try to find a job. And if I love it, then I figured it out. And if I don't, then I just keep doing it. So every summer, what I did was I would try a different job. So the first summer at business school, I was like, okay, nonprofit, because it's very hard to get an internship in your first summer too.
Mm.
So I went there and they had an accounting department, which only had one person. So I was like, can I do accounting for a couple of weeks?
Mm.
And they let me. So I, got a taste of accounting. I got a taste of event planning. I got a taste of, how do you also help people? It's a charity that helps homeless kids in the Vaughan region. So you learn a lot. You learn about, how to interact with people. And then I was like, okay, that was great, but I want to try something different. So then the second year I went to BlackBerry.
Mm.
And then, spent a lot of time at, it was a great internship. I learned a lot in their marketing department. And then I was like, okay, that was great. I learned about marketing, but, is there something more out there? And then I met a few mentors at Schulich who had done investment banking. And so, I started asking them, I'm like, what, the finance is such a broad spectrum. Can I, where do I even start? And then so, they helped guide me through the process, helped prep me for interviews. And then I, ended up with my first investment banking internship. And then, then really everything kind of goes from there onwards. So that's really how it all happened. It was really, figuring it out through time, and through, trial and error, really.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of trial and error. Yeah. And it sounds like, yeah, you had the capacity to really kind of engage, right? And like dip your hands into all of these different pots and see, well, what feels right? And I think I really appreciate that because you're right. There's so much pressure at this like age of like 15, 16 to really figure out like exactly what you want to do and lock it down. And we form these really linear paths for our careers and for our lives at that time. Well, I'm going to go to this school, do this program, get this job, and be married by 25 and have kids.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think we all have that. And then I think it sounds like you went in slightly with a more, I think, open mind and this experimental approach, if you will, to see, just gonna go with the flow, see what I like, pick and choose. I like that.
Yeah, like I think there's so much noise, right? There's noise from your own household, there's noise from the school you attend, there's noise from your own social circle. There's a lot of noise, and I think being able to distill what is actually something to pay attention to, like it's a skill you have to develop over a very long period of time, right? It can't happen overnight, but that's where like there's so much noise, like even in my own personal household when I was like no science, because I was the first person in the family to ever say that, right? My sister went down the path of science. So there's no rubric even for me to say, hey, like watch her, right? Like it worked out. So you're kind of like on no man's land trying to figure it all out. And it's definitely like the battles are, they kind of feel like they start at home first, right? And then you kind of are like, okay, if I'm good to get my parents on board, then, it's smooth sailing from then on. Because once they're kind of aligned with your vision, it is so much easier. Like my mom was very critical in helping me, get to where I am today. And my dad used to, drive me to my interviews. So like you do need the whole system to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder too, you were talking about all this external noise, and I wonder if you notice any internal noise as well, because with what happens for a lot of brown women that I've spoken to and myself is when we're faced with the options of these non-traditional careers, there's a lot of self-doubt that can come up. I remember with myself, I didn't even bother taking physics in grade 12. I could have. Part of me wanted to. I'd never taken a single business course in my entire life, ever. And now I run my own successful business, but I have never
Always
taken a
how it
business
works
course.
out.
Yeah. And I remember thinking in high school, and we had to pick, I think it was business, and then it was data management and all these courses. And I remember thinking, well, I can't do this stuff. I can't do it. So why bother? So I'm going to go towards the social sciences. And I'm curious to know if any of that is something that you had to grapple with, or did you find that you were always kind of very anchored to what you wanted?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think I have just come across people in my, it was really like my personal development was really anchored by external people, I would say.
Mm.
So in grade 9, like I met my best friend, and her objective every day was she was not interested in, being the most popular person. She was just most interested in ensuring she had the highest marks. And for a long time, I was like, I didn't understand that strategy. Like, aren't you here in high school to have fun, like, and be a 14-year-old? And I had like marks in the 70s back then.
Mm.
So I was in the 70s, she was in the 90s. I didn't get it. And I met her, and like the more I spent time with her, the more I absorbed that, it's really like, yeah, you can be in the 70s and have a great time, or you can kind of you can actually have a balance of both. Like I feel like that's something that I tried a lot to do in high school, was like be really good with your marks, but then also have friends, have a social life, go bowling, like get that experience as well. And so it was really when I met her where I figured out that it is important to really find what you want to do. And when I was at 70%, in the 70 zone, I was
Mm.
like, oh, like it's okay, it's nothing's like you're fine. But it was only through her that I really realized that you can focus on marks, you can focus on having a well-balanced life, you can focus on being with your parents. So the internal noise for me was more about, like you can rise, you can try. So when I did that in grade 9, where I was like, okay, I was in my 70s, and then I ended up starting going in my 90s. And I was like, oh, if you actually just work hard and you set a
Yeah.
goal, you can achieve it. And so then that like experience in a microcosm, like you start replicating through your whole life,
Yeah.
where it's like first it's grades, then it's like clubs you want to be a part of, then it's universities you want to be a part of, then when you're in university, which jobs and internships you want to target. So the internal noise for me was more about like having really strong mentors around that
Mm.
anchor you away from all that external noise.
Mm.
Internally, I've always felt that when I met these people, like I really soaked in like a sponge. And I found that to be like, what helped me from the inside as well. Because if I
Mm.
saw a really good example outside, I internalized myself to be more like them.
Mhm.
And so the noises of, not wanting to take a course or to take a course, like I was like, I don't want to be what they want to do. I want to see where that fits for me. Like, for example, my best friend is a doctor now. Complete different paths, right? She decided she wanted to
Yeah.
study and become a doctor. I was like, nope, not gonna happen for me. So I think in that sense, like you don't have to take everything they're doing, right, for face value as well. You have to kind of take it and then tweak it to your own life, your interests, your hobbies. But yeah, I think my internal voice has always been pushing me forward because I'm trying to surround myself with people that, are not okay with the status quo.
Mm. Yeah, I really like that. And what I'm really taking away from that is the importance of surrounding yourself, right? Like with the right people, because you're right. We're emotional sponges. We will soak up all the emotional energy around us. And if the energy around us is unfortunately very critical or doubtful or negative, we internalize that, right? And we start to give that to ourselves. And I think there is really long laundry list of rules for brown women, right?
Mhm.
Culturally, socially, like in a familial context, like it's really hard to keep up with this laundry list. And I think we can become so preoccupied with checking off all of those boxes that we are not able to pay attention to what it is that we really want for ourselves, right? And I think, yeah, I like that if you can surround yourself by people who feel like are filling your cup and are supporting you, then that's really like at the crux of it. Because you know what, this like laundry list is endless.
It'll never end.
It'll never end. You'll
There's
do
only more added to it.
exactly. You'll do everything right. You'll get the right job, the right promotion, blah, blah, blah. And then like there's still more. There's still, okay, now you'd have kids. And then you have 2 kids. And you know what? A boy and a girl. It's just
I
endless.
think the thing that I find that's important is like I think you have to live life by your own rules, which I think, more brown people are doing, but I think the more you solidify that thinking, like the more comfortable you also get with, decisions that feel like that are risky, right? Like the culture makes you feel like anything from outside the norm is now immediately a risk,
Right.
right? But if you don't take risk, there is, some decisions you have to decide that, okay, if I close this door of science and open myself to every other opportunity that exists in the world as well, right? There's a pathway to figure it out. It is a little bit harder, but I feel like you have to, have the trial and error, which I think like I find in a lot of, conversations and in social settings, you find that space sometimes doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
To fail, to try things out, and then to pivot, right? I feel like pivoting is so important, but it doesn't feel like it gets the right focus from people.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of spaces, I'm curious, what has it been like for you not only to be a woman in investment banking in this domain of finance, but also be a brown woman?
Yeah, it's been honestly a very rewarding career path. I think, when I did my internship, I got a very small taste. And I think from that day I knew knew the bug was caught. And
Yeah.
so it was very easy to come back. So I've done 10 years now. And, I would say in terms of the industry, like it's kind of similar to law,
Right.
STEM, where, you feel like there is, that there is a disproportion, but it's honestly been, I mean, being a part of the change, right? Like helping hire now,
Mm.
being involved in that, going back to Schulich and also helping students prep and mentor. So you feel like you are also part of the change as well, which I think is great. I had a coffee last week with a brown female, and she said that the panel I did at Schulich last year was the reason why she wanted to do investment banking. So it
That's
really makes it's really nice to hear that, affirms your belief in helping out as well. So I think, the way I just break it down is like there's things to do on the job, and that's really where the learning is. I
mm,
say, business school training is really just a foundation. And then you really do all of your learning really on the job. All the technical skills you need to learn, the presentation, and, how the industry works. And then
mm,
I would say the external side is, once you're in the industry, like there is a big, a really big focus by any level to also give back to the schools you're from, or, just even to students in general. And
mm,
so part of my focus in that is, giving back and reciprocating as much of that as I can. And it's not really school specific, like I'll meet anyone, right? So from any school. But that's really where it comes from is I think, you have to do great work and also be able to give back. So I think the panels at Schulich have been really good in getting people
mm,
to understand, what is investment banking, how does it actually go from a day to day. And I think in terms of the female experience, I think, that's something that I've never personally found something that is distinctive at work. Like the
mm,
people that you're working with are, not changing behaviors, or it's just you are one member of the team is how I describe it.
mm. That sounds incredible. Yeah, that sounds really nice. And yeah, I really like what you said around being part of the change, right? Because I think you're absolutely right. The tide is turning quite a bit. And I think more and more folks are finding themselves questioning these like traditional gender roles and career paths that have been like stuffed down our throats and are really kind of exploring, okay, well, is this something that works for me? And what do I want to do? And I like that. I like that you're kind of part of that change. So I imagine too, it doesn't feel perhaps as foreign of a concept that it might do to someone who's outside of it, like it does to me, right? Because we don't see, like when we see, I don't know, like Wall Street on TV, we don't see women or forget like women, like cultural minorities, right? It's just not something that we see. But I think because you're kind of part of it, it doesn't feel like you're in so much of a silo.
Yeah, and I would say like, I watch Bloomberg pretty religiously. So there's really
That's
great
true.
diversity on
That's
Bloomberg
true.
TV in particular. Like I think the host is, Sonali Basak is one of the most popular ones that I see interviewing all CEOs. So I think, like it's also like refreshing our own blind spots, right?
Right.
So I see a lot of females asking, financial questions on TV. If you read the authors of Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, like there's also a lot of female names. So I think it's just like, we also ourselves need to refresh some of our views. And it wasn't even me who realized it. It was actually my husband who said, every time we're turning on Bloomberg, like it's pretty well covered. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's for
Yeah.
you. Like, so it's someone else also refreshing it for you. It doesn't just have to come from your own self.
That's actually a really good point. And you're absolutely right. As soon as you said it, I thought too, yeah, because my partner watches Bloomberg as well. And I'll just sort of, once I walked in, and you're right, I think I saw that same host talking, and I just sort of stopped in my tracks and I said, whoa, this person looks like me. And she's talking about finance. And this is nice. So I think that was the first time I actually sat down and watched like a full segment. Found myself Googling things on the side. But I think you're absolutely right. This whole idea of refreshing our own blind spots to see what is it that kind of we're missing out on, because perhaps the change has already been there for quite some time. We're just not able to tap into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So another thing that's been really kind of close to my heart for some time has been this topic of like financial literacy. And it's been a bit of a personal project for me too. I think a couple episodes ago, I was speaking to our listeners about how it's not something that I tapped into until my late 20s. Partly because I was also busy with life, with my master's and moving out and blah, 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 starting my practice. But it's been such a fun ride exploring financial literacy. And it's really interesting because, you and I are kind of part of the same friend group, right? The larger friend group. And it's not a topic that just like women socially maybe generally discuss, or maybe in the circles that I have been in. And the anecdotal learning that I have sort of had, and as I speak to a lot of brown women on a daily basis, I've really gathered that this is a topic that most like brown women are just not comfortable with, like financial literacy and really feeling confident in this domain, really like exploring what does this really mean, what is this about, is not something that so many of us are well versed in. And I'm curious to know, has that been sort of what you've been seeing as well as a larger trend in our communities? I know there's obviously exceptions, but a larger trend?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question, also very close to my heart because it's something that you see in the periphery, but you want to also help people impact and change as well. So I think stepping back, in my household, the way it worked was that, my mom was, she was a working woman in the 80s in Mumbai. So we had a really good mentor at home. So it really did start from home for us. And,
Yeah.
when we moved to Canada, my mom, always had a job. She actually studied again. And so she went through the whole process of like understanding the importance of education and what does a salary mean, right? Because a house only works on a budget. And so she knew her contribution, she knew my dad's contribution, and how to make it all work. So the way we grew up was that, my dad would manage that, but my mom would have a say. But, it was very imbalanced because, he would feel like he would be the decision maker. And so then it felt like, oh, but, when you actually look in hindsight, it was her business decisions that were actually better. And my dad was the one that went to business. So it was like you saw growing up this like dichotomy in the household where you just could not, I could not process this as like a 10-year-old, 15-year-old. Like I didn't understand it. And so now as like I go through, my own personal experiences, I think in financial literacy, it's just important for everyone to do their homework. I found that to be a very important message from my own like growing up in that household because, they both had great ideas, but, there was, you kind of have to work together to come to the right conclusion. And so in the social settings that I see now a lot, I completely agree with you. Like I think brown women in particular, just, shut that door for themselves without giving it a try.
Mm.
I think in some cases it feels like it's a matter of, it's prideful almost to say that, right? That, oh, I don't need to worry about it.
Mm.
It's like, not an area of even concern, but it's for me, it's like, I hear that a lot in social settings where, you're gathered with a group of women and you ask them, some of these questions. And for me, I always give the feedback that, hey, it's kind of actually disappointing to hear that,
Mm.
because you should be immersed as much as your partner in making those financial decisions, right? And it's really, even in a household where one person works in finance and one person doesn't, the other non-finance persons should still be immersed in
Yeah.
uh, financial decision makings, because every person has a blind spot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have those conversations. So I mean, for me, it's always been a struggle to try to figure out why that's the case, why, we tend to shut ourselves at that conversations, or why women even don't have those conversations, right? I think in social settings where, I see two different things. Like even recently I saw that, like if the men are gathered, they'll talk more about, ideas, business, and then the woman kind of like, push themselves to talk about things like travel, jewelry. But it's like you would wish for that to interconnect on both sides, right? Because men could also use some fashion tips. The woman can also use some business ideas, right? So I feel like that interconnection, I wish to see more often in social settings, because I think there's so much to learn. Like I genuinely have found over time, like all of the defining moments in my life have been very organic for meeting the right people, being in the right place, asking the right questions, or overhearing something, right?
Yeah.
So I think like you really lose that opportunity to learn if you don't immerse yourself in that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that immersion can be so challenging, right? So difficult. So many of us don't even have these groups where we can feel like we have someone to kind of go to for like financial advice, right? And I think what you're kind of sharing for yourself is you've had a very relatively more like egalitarian type of like a role modeling in the home, right? Growing up. And that makes me really curious about other people's kind of experience of it, right? And it's interesting in my home growing up too. I have like a working mom and like a mom who is a scientist, has a PhD, managed like all like the finances and things like that in the home, but it never translated for some reason. I think I noticed that and I thought, oh, this is nice, but it never translated for me. And it didn't translate for me until, for me, I met my partner about 9 years ago, 9 years ago now. And I would see him, sort of talk about the financial markets and things like that. And all of that would just sort of go over my head. And I think we carry as a group, we carry so much doubt within ourselves too, that is this really for me? Can I really understand it? Do I have the capacity? And we shy away from what we perceive as intimidating, right? Because nobody likes discomfort. You don't like to be in a space and not know what's going on or what this means. So either to fit into a social situation, we'll sort of just nod our heads and say, yeah, I totally get that. There's like panic on the inside, like what is going on? I don't understand any of this, but I don't want to be vulnerable and say, hey, what does that mean? So I'm just going to pretend and switch topics. And that's something that I personally felt come up for myself a lot, to the point where I really asked myself in my late 20s, said, why not? Why am I not exploring this? I am capable. I have a master's degree. I've started my own practice. Why am I not exploring this domain for myself? And I think a lot of that, like you're saying, comes with some self-reflection too as an adult, right? To be able to say, okay, we were socialized perhaps one way, or something unfortunately wasn't modeled for us in the home, so we're not exposed to it, so we don't know what we're missing. But the good news about being an adult is you can create some of that, like we call it in my profession, reparenting, right? When you're able to give yourself as an adult what you didn't get as a child. And for some of us, it's that emotional stuff, but some of it is actually the opportunity for these exploration of this stuff, right? And that's what it looks like for some of us, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think there's so much content available now, right? Like I think in the 80s trying to do this, I completely understand it would be very hard. Right. So I think the world is really your oyster, right? Like if you want to learn, there is, things from a YouTube video to reading the news to watching something, just even a 5-minute video, and people will break it down for you, right? So I think sometimes it's like if you don't ask the question because you're uncomfortable, but you will not, anything that you have to learn in life, you have to be a little bit uncomfortable, right? So that's how growth really does happen. So I think, I would say, I would encourage women to put themselves in that position if someone says something and they don't understand or want to learn more from someone. Even in my own personal experiences, like I don't find that, brown women in particular will ask, to understand more about my job because I think like it's like they hear the buzzword and they've kind of decided what the job is, right? And so I don't find that there's questions about like what exactly is the job, which like what do you actually do? And it's actually different because once you understand the job, you could have more questions, you could understand more, and just figure out maybe if there's something for you to learn as well, right? I'm always willing to ask questions in any setting because
Yeah.
I'm wanting to know more and learn more. So, and I think that's the one thing that has been really helpful in my own personal and professional development is the pursuit of constant learning.
Mm.
You can always learn. You can always learn from, and it's not even from
Mhm.
like, I think people perceive it as like someone older than you have to learn from. You can learn from people younger than you too.
Yeah.
Age is not a factor. Gender is not a factor. Learn from anyone and everyone
Mhm.
and just be open to that. If
Yeah.
you keep that door open, things will come right in.
Yeah, as you said, what comes to mind for me, something that I tell the folks that I work with a lot, that there is a difference between discomfort and pain. We often confuse the two. But it's when you go to a yoga class and they tell you to hold a pose and they say hold it to the point of discomfort, but not pain. So in order for there to be some sort of growth and there needs to be vulnerability, but then we have to be able to be okay with some discomfort, right? If it's creating this like significant distress and pain, then you know that you're kind of really forcing your system to do something that it doesn't want to do. But there's got to be a little bit of that, I think, acceptance of discomfort that, okay, you know what? Yeah, I don't know what this means. Like, do you mind explaining that to me? Right. And we may not be able to be like vulnerable with everyone around us, right? To be able to say something like that. For me, it was really my partner. And, I had to stop him once and say, I have no idea what you just said, but I'm curious. Right. So
Yeah.
explain to me like you would to someone who's never taken a business course. What do you mean when you say financial markets? And then I took like an online course at Yale, which I never ended up really enjoying because it was really boring. But then I turned to some of the other stuff, like some books and YouTube videos that are available. But I think there's got to be this, I think, willingness to face some discomfort.
Yeah. And I think you have to have accountability too, right? That you want to learn. And the way I view it is, if you as a partner don't learn and have one person make all the decisions, there's a risk in that, right? First of all.
Absolutely.
And then second, like once you have kids, the family develops, the impact goes into the children too, right? So you're not just impacting one life now, you've potentially impacted 4 lives, right? So I think the discomfort to not learn has, a lot of consequences if, you can make better decisions or help them make, solidify their decisions too, right? Not everything is about, fighting what the other person's doing. It's more about, oh, I agree with you because, I've also done my own research.
Mhm.
And that's how we do it in our household. Every time we're thinking about a new idea or a new investment, both parties have to do their research
Mm.
and we have a discussion around it. And then, sometimes you always learn new things. And even vacation planning, we started doing that because you realize that, you have different interests in what you want to achieve out of a vacation. And
Mm.
so we do the same. We both research the cities, the countries separately, and then we kind of come together and we're like, oh, we'll take a little bit from yours, we take a little bit from mine, and then now the itinerary is put together. So I think in that way, you're like, oh, this is my day, this is your day. And then it permeates, right? That kind of same thinking. You can apply it to travel, you can apply it to finance, you
Mhm.
can apply it to even, day-to-day chore decision making.
Mhm. The couples therapist in me is very happy. That sounds very healthy. Thank you everyone for joining us today for part 1 of our discussion on brown women and financial literacy. Don't forget to tune in next week for the next episode of my conversation with Dimple. Hope you enjoyed today's chat and stay tuned for this disclaimer.
The guest and the host of Brown People Problems do not offer individualized therapeutic or medical advice, and our conversations should not be interpreted as such. This podcast is not a replacement for therapy. This podcast exists for educational purposes only. Please consider your circumstances and engage with the content mindfully.